The Secret Doctrine by Elena Petrovna Blavatsky, a facsimile of the original edition of 1888, printed by the Cunningham Press, Alhambra, California. Volume 1, Cosmogenesis. Part 2, The Evolution of Symbolism in its approximate order, with explanatory sections. Section 6, The Mundane Egg. Whence this universal symbol? The egg was incorporated as a sacred sign in the cosmogony of every people on the earth, and was revered both on account of its form and its inner mystery. From the earliest mental conceptions of man, it was known as that which represented most successfully the origin and secret of being. The gradual development of the imperceptible germ within the closed shell, the inward working, without any apparent outward interference of force, which from a latent nothing produced an active something, needing naught save heat, and which, having gradually evolved into a concrete living creature, broke its shell, appearing to the outward senses of all this self-generated and self-created being, must have been a standing miracle from the beginning. The secret teaching explains the reason for this reverence by the symbolism of the prehistoric races. The first cause had no name in the beginnings. Later it was pictured in the fancy of the thinkers as an ever-invisible, mysterious bird that dropped an egg into chaos, which egg becomes the universe. Hence Brahm was called Kalahansa, the swan in space and time. He became the swan of eternity, who lays at the beginning of each Mahamanvantara a golden egg. It typifies the great circle, or O, itself a symbol for the universe and its spherical bodies. The second reason for its having been chosen as the symbolical representation of the universe and of our earth was its form. It was a circle and a sphere, and the oviform shape of our globe must have been known from the beginning of symbology, since it was so universally adopted. The first manifestation of the cosmos in the form of an egg was the most widely diffused belief of antiquity. As Bryant shows, Chapter 3, page 165, it was a symbol adopted among the Greeks, the Syrians, Persians, and Egyptians. In Chapter 65 of the Egyptian ritual, Seb, the god of time and of the earth, is spoken of as having laid an egg, or the universe, an egg conceived at the hour the great one of the dual force, section 5, 2, 3, etc. Ra is shown like gestating in the egg of the universe. The deceased is resplendent in the egg of the land of mysteries, for this is the egg to which is given life among the gods. Chapter 42, 2. It is the egg of the great clucking hen, the egg of Seb, who issues from it like a hawk. 64, 1, 2, 3, and 77, 1. With the Greeks, the Orphic egg is described by Aristophanes, and was part of the Dionysiac and other mysteries, during which the mundane egg was consecrated and its significance explained, Porphyry showing it a representation of the world, ermeu to de tou cosmou. Faber and Bryant have tried to show that the egg typified the Ark of Noah, which, unless the latter is accepted as purely allegorical and symbolical, is a wild belief. It can have typified the ark only as a synonym of the moon, the arga, which carries the universal seed of life, but it had surely nothing to do with the ark of the Bible. Anyhow, the belief that the universe existed in the beginning in the shape of an egg was general, and as Wilson has it, a similar account of the first aggregation of the elements in the form of an egg is given in all the Indian Puranas, with the usual epithet haima or hiranya, golden, as it occurs in Manu. Hiranya, however, means resplendent, shining, rather than golden, as proven by the great Indian scholar, the late Swami Dyanand Saraswati, in his unpublished polemics with Professor Max Müller, has said in the Vishnu Purana, intellect, Mahat, the unmanifested gross elements inclusive, formed an egg, and the Lord of the universe himself abided in it, in the character of Brahma. In that egg, the circle, Brahman, were the continents, and seas and mountains, the planets and divisions of the universe, the gods, the demons, and mankind. Book 1, Chapter 2. Both in Greece and in India, the first visible male being, who united in himself the nature of either sex, abode in the egg and issued from it. This firstborn of the world was Dionysius with some Greeks, the god who sprang from the mundane egg, and from whom the mortals and immortals were derived. The god Ra is shown in the ritual Book of the Dead, chapter 1750, beaming in his egg, the sun, and he starts off as soon as the god Shu, the solar energy, awakens and gives him the impulse. He is in the solar egg, the egg to which is given life among the gods. Same source, chapter 42, verse 13. The solar god exclaims, I am the creative soul of the celestial abyss. None sees my nest, none can break my egg, I am the Lord. Same source, chapter 85. In view of this circle of form, the vertical line issuing from the circle or the egg, or the male from the female in the androgyne, it is strange to find a scholar saying on the ground that the most ancient Indian manuscripts show no trace of it, that the ancient Aryans were ignorant of the decimal notation. The 10, being the sacred number of the universe, was secret and esoteric, both as the unit and cipher, or 0, the circle. Moreover, Professor Max Müller says that the two words cipher and 0, which are but one, are sufficient to prove that our figures are borrowed from the Arabs. Note, see Max Müller's Our Figures, end of note. Cipher is the Arabic sifron and means empty, a translation of the Sanskrit name of naught, sinya, he says. Note, a Kabbalist would be rather inclined to believe that as the Arabic sifron was taken from the Indian sinya, naught, so the Jewish Kabbalistic sephirot, sephirim, were taken from the word cipher, not in the sense of emptiness, but the reverse, that of creation by number and degrees in their evolution, 10, or the vertical line within the circle. End of note. The Arabs had their figures from Hindustan and never claimed the discovery for themselves. Note, see Max Müller's Our Figures, end of note. As to the Pythagoreans, we need but turn to the ancient manuscripts of Boethius' Geometry, composed in the 6th century, to find among the Pythagorean numerals the 1 and the 0 as the first and final ciphers. Note, see King's Gnostics and their remains, plate 13, end of note. And Porphyry, who quotes from the Pythagorean Moderatus, says that the numerals of Pythagoras were hieroglyphical symbols by means whereof he explained ideas concerning the nature of things, or the origin of the universe. Note, Vita Pythagorae, end of note. Now, if on the other hand, the most ancient Indian manuscripts show as yet no trace of decimal notation in them, and Max Müller states very clearly that until now he has found but 9 letters, the initials of the Sanskrit numerals, in them, on the other hand, we have records as ancient to supply the wanted proof. We speak of the sculptures and the sacred imagery in the most ancient temples of the Far East. Pythagoras derived his knowledge from India, and we find Professor Max Müller corroborating this statement at least so far as to allow the Neo-Pythagoreans to have been the first teachers of ciphering among the Greeks and Romans, that they at Alexandria or in Syria became acquainted with the Indian figures and adapted them to the Pythagorean abacus, our figures. This cautious admission implies that Pythagoras himself was acquainted with but 9 figures. Thus we might reasonably answer that, although we possess no certain proof exoterically that the decimal notation was known by Pythagoras, who lived on the very close of the archaic ages, we have yet sufficient evidence to show that the full numbers as given by Boethius were known to the Pythagoreans even before Alexandria was built. Note on the close of the archaic ages, 608 before Christ, end of note. Note on Alexandria. This city was built 332 before Christ, end of note. This evidence we find in Aristotle, who says that some philosophers hold that ideas and numbers are of the same nature and amount to 10 in all. Note, Metaphors, chapter 7, section F. This, we believe, will be sufficient to show that the decimal notation was known among them at least as early as 4 centuries before Christ, for Aristotle does not seem to treat the question as an innovation of the Neo-Pythagoreans. But we know more than that. We know that the decimal system must have been known to the mankind of the earliest archaic ages, since the whole astronomical and geometrical portion of the secret sacerdotal language was built upon the number 10, or the combination of the male and female principles, and since the pyramid of Cheops is built upon the measures of this decimal notation, or rather upon the digits and their combinations with the naught. Of this, however, sufficient was said in Isis Unveiled, and it is useless to repeat and return to the same subject. The symbolism of the lunar and solar deities is so inextricably mixed up that it is next to impossible to separate such glyphs as the egg, the lotus, and the quote sacred unquote animals from each other. The ibis, for instance, sacred to Isis, who is often represented with the head of that bird, sacred also to Mercury or Tot, because that god assumed its form while escaping from Typhon. The ibis was held in the greatest veneration in Egypt. There were 2 kinds of ibises, Herodotus tells us, in the 2nd volume, chapter 75 at Sequence. In that country, one quite black, the other black and white. The form is credited with fighting and exterminating the winged serpents, which came every spring from Arabia and infested the country. The other was sacred to the moon, because the latter planet is white and brilliant on her external side, dark and black on that side which she never turns to the earth. Moreover, the ibis kills land serpents and makes the most terrible havoc amongst the eggs of the crocodile, and thus saves Egypt from having the Nile infested by those horrible saurians. The bird is credited with doing so in the moonlight, and thus being helped by Isis as the moon, her sidereal symbol. But the near esoteric truth underlying these popular myths is that Hermes, as shown by Ebenephius, De Culte Egypte, watched under the form of that bird of the Egyptians and taught them the occult arts and sciences. This means simply that the ibis religiosa had and has, quote, magical, unquote, properties in common with many other birds, the albatross preeminently, and the mythical white swan, the swan of eternity or time, the Kalahansa. Were it otherwise indeed, why should all the ancient peoples, who were no more fools than we are, have had such a superstitious dread of killing certain birds? In Egypt, he who killed an ibis, or the golden hawk, the symbol of the sun and Osiris, risked and could hardly escape death. The veneration of some nations for birds was such that Zoroaster, in his precepts, forbids their slaughter as a heinous crime. We laugh in our age at every kind of divination. Yet why should so many generations have believed in divination by birds, and even in zoomancy, said by Suidas to have been imparted by Orpheus, who taught how to perceive in the yolk and white of the egg, under certain conditions, that which the bird born from it would have seen round it during its short life. This occult art, which demanded 3,000 years ago the greatest learning and the most abstruse mathematical calculations, has now fallen into the depths of degradation. It is old cooks and fortune-tellers who read their future to servant girls in search of husbands by means of the white of an egg in a glass. Nevertheless, even Christians have to this day their sacred birds, for instance the dove, the symbol of the Holy Ghost. Nor have they neglected the sacred animals. The evangelical zoolatry, the bull, the eagle, the lion and the angel, in reality the cherub or seraph, the fire-winged serpent, is as much pagan as that of the Egyptians or the Chaldeans. These 4 animals are in reality the symbols of the 4 elements and of the 4 lower principles in man. Nevertheless, they correspond physically and materially to the 4 constellations that form, so to speak, the suite or cortege of the solar god, and occupy during the winter solstice the 4 cardinal points of the zodiacal circle. These 4, quote, animals, unquote, may be seen in many of the Roman Catholic New Testaments where the portraits of the evangelists are given. They are the animals of Ezekiel's Merkabah. As truly stated by Ragon, the ancient hierophants have combined so cleverly the dogmas and symbols of their religious philosophies that these symbols can be fully explained only by the combination and knowledge of all the keys. They can be only approximately interpreted, even if one finds out 3 out of these 7 systems, the anthropological, the psychic, and the astronomical. The 2 chief interpretations, the highest and the lowest, the spiritual and the physiological, they preserved in the greatest secrecy until the latter fell into the dominion of the profane. Thus far we regard only to the prehistoric hierophants, with whom that which has now become purely or impurely phallic was a science as profound and as mysterious as biology and physiology are now. This was their exclusive property, the fruit of their studies and discoveries. The other 2 were those which dealt with the creative gods, theogony, and with creative man, that is, the ideal and the practical mysteries. These interpretations were so cleverly veiled and combined that many were those who, while arriving at the discovery of one meaning, were baffled in understanding the significance of the others, and could never unriddle them sufficiently to commit dangerous indiscretions. The highest, the first and the 4th, theogony in relation to anthropogony, were almost impossible to fathom. We find the proofs of this in the Jewish Holy Writ. It is owing to the serpent being oviparous that it became a symbol of wisdom and an emblem of the logoi, or the self-born. In the temple of Philae, in Upper Egypt, an egg was artificially prepared of clay, made of various incenses, and it was made to hatch by a peculiar process when a cerastes, the horned viper, was born. The same was done in antiquity for the cobra in the Indian temples. The creative god emerges from the egg that issues from the mouth of Kneph as a winged serpent, because the serpent is the symbol of the all-wisdom. With the Hebrews he is glyphed by the flying of fiery serpents of the wilderness and Moses, and with the Alexandrian mystics he becomes the Orpheo Christos, the Logos of the Gnostics. The Protestants try to show that the allegory of the brazen serpent and the fiery serpents has a direct reference to the mystery of Christ and crucifixion, but it has a far nearer relation in truth to the mystery of generation when dissociated from the egg with the central germ, or the circle with its central point. Note on Christ and crucifixion. And this only because the brazen serpent was lifted on a pole. It had rather a reference to Miku, the Egyptian egg, standing upright supported by the sacred Tau, since the egg and the serpent are inseparable in the old worshipper and symbology of Egypt, and since both the brazen and fiery serpents were seraphs, the burning fiery messengers, or the serpent gods, the Nagas of India. It was a purely phallic symbol without the egg, while when associated with it, it related to cosmic creation. End of note. The brazen serpent had no such holy meaning as that, nor was it in fact glorified above the fiery serpents, for the bite of which it was only a natural remedy. The symbological meaning of the word brazen being the feminine principle, and that of the fiery or gold the male one. Note: brass was a metal symbolizing the netherworld, that of the womb where life should be given. The word for serpent was in Hebrew nachash, but this is the same term for brass. It is said in Numbers 21 that the Jews complained of the wilderness where there was no water, verse 5, after which the Lord sent fiery serpents to bite them when, to oblige Moses, he gives him as a remedy the brazen serpent on a pole to look at, after which any man, when he beheld the serpent of brass, lived, in brackets question mark. After that, the quote Lord, unquote, gathering the people together at the well of Beer, gives them water, 14-16, and grateful Israel sang this song. Spring up, O well, spring up, O well, verse 17. When, after studying symbology, the Christian reader comes to understand the innermost meaning of these three symbols, water, brazen, the serpent, and a few more, in the sense given to them in the Holy Bible, he will hardly like to connect the sacred name of his Saviour with the brazen serpent incident. The seraphim, fiery winged serpents, are no doubt connected with and inseparable from the idea of the serpent of eternity, God, as explained in Kinnelly's Apocalypse. But the word cherub also meant serpent in one sense, though its direct meaning is different, because the cherubim and the Persian winged griffins, the guardians of the Golden Mountain, are the same, and their compound name shows their character, as it is formed of kr, circle, and aub, or orb, serpent, therefore a serpent in a circle. And this settles the phallic character of the brazen serpent, and justifies Hezekiah for breaking it. See 2 Kings 18:4, verbum sat sapienti. End of note. In the Book of the Dead, as just shown, reference is often made to the egg. Ra, the Mighty One, remains in his egg during the struggle between the children of the rebellion and Shu, the solar energy, and the dragon of darkness. Chapter 17. The deceased is resplendent in his egg when he crosses the land of mystery. 22:1. He is the egg of Seb. Leviticus 1-3. The egg was a symbol of life in immortality and eternity, and also the glyph of the generative matrix, and the tau associated with it only of life and birth in generation. The mundane egg was placed in Knum, the water of space, of the feminine abstract principle, Knum becoming, with the fall of mankind into generation and phallicism, Ammon, the creative god. And when Ptah, the fiery god, carries the mundane egg in his hand, then the symbolism becomes quite terrestrial and concrete in its significance. In conjunction with the hawk, the symbol of Osiris' son, the symbol is dual. It relates to both lives, the mortal and the immortal. In Kircher's Oedipus Aegypticus, Volume 3, page 124, one can see in the papyrus engraved in it an egg floating above the mummy. This is a symbol of hope and the promise of a second birth for the Osirified dead. His soul, after due purification in the Amenti, will gestate in this egg of immortality to be reborn from it into a new life on earth. For this egg, in the esoteric doctrine, is the Devakan, the abode of bliss, the winged Scarabaeus being alike a symbol of it. The winged globe is but another form of the egg, and has the same significance as the Scarabaeus, the Kopiru, from the root Kupuru, to become, to be reborn, which relates to the rebirth of man as well as to his spiritual regeneration. In the theogony of Mokus, we find aether first, and then the air, from which Ulom, the intelligible, Uetos, deity, the visible universe of matter, is born out of the mundane egg. See Mervis, Foiniser, page 282. In the Orphic hymns, the Eros furnace evolved from the divine egg, which the ethereal winds impregnate, wind being the spirit of the unknown darkness, the spirit of God, as explains K.O. Müller, 236. The divine idea, says Plato, who is said to move aether. In the Hindu Katakopanishad, Purusha, the divine spirit, already stands before the original matter, from whose union springs the great soul of the world, Mahatma, Brahma, the spirit of life, etc., etc. Notes. The latter appellations are all identical with Anima Mundi, or the universal soul, the astral light of the Kabbalists and the occultists, or the egg of darkness. Note. See Weber, Academie Foles, pages 213, 214, et sequens. End of notes. Besides this, there are many charming allegories on the subject, scattered through the sacred books of the Brahmins. In one place it is the female creator who is first a germ, then a drop of heavenly dew, a pearl, and then an egg. In such cases, of which there are too many to enumerate them separately, the egg gives birth to the 4 elements within the 5th, ether, and is covered with 7 coverings, which become later on the 7 upper and the 7 lower worlds. Breaking in 2, the shell becomes the heaven, and the meat in the egg the earth, the white forming the terrestrial waters. Then again it is Vishnu who emerges from within the egg with a lotus in his hand. Vineta, a daughter of Daksha and wife of Kashyapa, the self-born sprung from time, one of the 7, quote, creators, unquote, of our world, brought forth an egg from which was born Garuda, the vehicle of Vishnu, the latter allegory having a relation to our earth only, as Garuda is the great cycle. The egg was sacred to Isis. The priests of Egypt never ate eggs on that account. Note, Isis is almost always represented holding a lotus in one hand and in the other a circle and the cross, crux ansata, the egg being sacred to her. End of note. Diodorus Siculus states that Osiris was born from an egg, like Brahma. From Leda's egg, Apollo and Latona were born, as also Castor and Pollux, the bright Gemini. And though the Buddhists do not attribute the same origin to their founder, yet no more than the ancient Egyptians or the modern Brahmins do they eat eggs, lest they should destroy the germ of life latent in them, and commit thereby sin. The Chinese believe that their first man was born from an egg, which Tien, a god, dropped down from heaven to earth into the waters. Note, the Chinese seem to have thus anticipated Sir William Thomson's theory that the first living germ had dropped to the earth from some passing comet. Query, why should this be called scientific, and the Chinese idea a superstitious, foolish theory? End of note. This symbol is still regarded by some as representing the idea of the origin of life, which is a scientific truth, though the human ovum is invisible to the naked eye. Therefore we see respect shown to it from the remotest past by the Greeks, Phoenicians, Romans, the Japanese, and the Siamese, the North and South American tribes, and even the savages of the remotest islands. With the Egyptians, the concealed god was Ammon, Mon. All their gods were dual, the scientific reality for the sanctuary, its double the fabulous and mythical entity for the masses. For instance, as observed in Chaos Theos Cosmos, The older Horus was the idea of the world remaining in the demiurgic mind, born in darkness before the creation of the world. The second Horus was the same idea going forth from the Logos, becoming clothed with matter and assuming an actual existence. Compare Mervis, Phoenizer, page 268. Note: Horus the older, or Haroiri, is an ancient aspect of the solar god, contemporary with Ra and Shu. Haroiri is often mistaken for Horus, son of Osiris and Isis. The Egyptians very often represented the rising sun under the form of Hor the older, rising from a full-blown lotus, the universe, when the solar disk is always found on the hawk head of that god. Haroiri is Khnum. End of note. The same with Khnum and Amun. Both are represented ram-headed, and both often confused, though their functions are different. Khnum is the modeler of men, fashioning men and things out of the mundane egg on a potter's wheel. Amun-Ra, the generator, is the secondary aspect of the concealed deity. Khnum was adored at Elephanta and Philo, Amun at Thebes. Note: his triadic goddesses are Sati and Anuki. End of note. But it is Imfit, the one supreme planetary principle, who blows the egg out of his mouth and who is therefore Brahma, the shadow of the deity, cosmic and universal, of that which broods over and permeates the egg with its vivifying spirit until the germ contained in it is ripe, was the mystery god whose name was unpronounceable. It is Ptah, however, he who opens, the opener of life and death, who proceeds from the egg of the world to begin his dual work. Book of Numbers. Note: Ptah was originally the god of death, of destruction, like Shiva. He is a solar god only by virtue of the sun's fire killing as well as vivifying. He was the national god of Memphis, the radiant and fair-faced god. See Saqqara, Bronzes, Saitic Epoch. End of note. According to the Greeks, the phantom form of the Chemis, ancient Egypt, which floats on the ethereal waves of the Empyrean sphere, was called into being by Horus Apollo, the sun god, who caused it to evolve out of the mundane egg. Note: the Brahmanda Purana contains the mystery about Brahma's golden egg fully, and this is why perhaps it is inaccessible to the Orientalists, who say that this Purana, like the Skanda, is no longer procurable in a collective body, but is represented by a variety of khandas and mahatmyas professing to be derived from it. The Brahmanda Purana is described as that which is declared in 12,200 verses, the magnificence of the egg of Brahma, and in which an account of the future kalpas is contained as revealed by Brahma. Quite so, and much more perchance. End of note. In the Scandinavian cosmogony, placed by Professor Max Müller in point of time as far anterior to the Vedas, in the poem of Voluspa, the song of the prophetess, the mundane egg is again discovered in the phantom germ of the universe, which is represented as lying in the Ginun Agop, the cup of illusion, Maya, the boundless and void abyss. In this world's matrix, formerly a region of night and desolation, Nebelheim, the mist place, the nebula as it's called now, in the astral light, dropped a ray of cold light which overflowed this cup and froze in it. Then the invisible blew a scorching wind which dissolved the frozen waters and cleared the mist. These waters, chaos, called the streams of Elivagar, distilling in vivifying drops, fell down and created the earth and the giant Ymir, who only had the semblance of a man, the heavenly man, and the cow, Ord Humbla, the mother of astral light, cosmic soul, from whose udder flowed 4 streams of milk, the 4 cardinal points, the 4 heads of the 4 rivers of Eden, etc., etc. and which 4 allegorically are symbolized by the cube in all its various and mystical meanings. The Christians, especially the Greek and Latin churches, have fully adopted the symbol and seen it a commemoration of life eternal, of salvation and of resurrection. This is found in and corroborated by the time-honored custom of exchanging Easter eggs. From the anguinum, the egg of the pagan druid, whose name alone made Rome tremble with fear, to the red Easter egg of the Slavonian peasant, a cycle has passed. And yet, whether in civilized Europe or among the abject savages of Central America, we find the same archaic, primitive thought, if we only search for it and do not disfigure, in the haughtiness of our fancied mental and physical superiority, the original idea of the symbol. Next section is section 7, the days and nights, or Brahma.